So I'd been in out of therapy all the way through since the early 90s. And every single time it was the same thing: guilt, anger, shame. Why am I here again? Why can't I fix this? What is wrong with me? Why can't I just be happy like everybody else? All this negative self-reinforcing stuff that goes on, and always I felt like I'd failed. Then I didn't like talking about things, so I went through a pattern every time of just saying what I had to say once I'd stabilised enough to get me out of there and back to whatever I wanted to do. So this created a pattern of patching myself up, lurching along for another couple of years, breaking, patching myself up, lurching along for another couple of years, breaking. And I went through that pattern many, many times. But the consistent feature was it was always somebody else's fault. There was always somebody else to blame for my decisions and my failures and my mistakes.
Hello and welcome to The Gift Show, a show created to help you get your future together. My guest today is Scott Stevenson.
I like to tag myself as the happiest clinically depressed man you're ever likely to meet. And that's because I spent most of my life fighting with post-traumatic stress disorder, bulimia, anxiety, and a whole host of mental health issues that, even though I knew I had them, I never really accepted I had them, and I was in denial my whole life. And then that brought me around to a massive change in my late 40s, about 7 years old. I had a really long, hard look at myself, and that's when I started changing direction in my life. Left my nice, comfortable job with a nice, safe salary and security, and decided to head out on my own and do something that made me passionate, something that made me want to get up in the morning, and that was telling other people about mental health, telling people my story, and encouraging others not to stay in the rut they're trapped in, that there is hope out there is change out there, and all you have to do is have the courage to take those first few steps, and then life can really change for everybody. And that would be, to use the name of your show, that would be the gift I give everybody today: the hope that there is change out there. No matter how deep the pit is, no matter how dark the despair is, there is always hope. You can always change.
And just take a step back here. Can you explain to the audience what's the source of your post-traumatic stress disorder, your bulimia, and your depression?
Okay, so again, I used to think it was caused by many things, but after doing a lot of thought about myself, but one of the things that most stood out in my background, or that had the most lasting effect on me, was back in 2000 and would have been 2003. I was serving in Iraq with the Royal Military Police. On operations there. My job at the time was working with the courts and doing bomb disposal work, etc., or bomb search work. So quite dangerous, scary stuff. But that wasn't what caused me the problem. That caused me a real problem was a friend of mine, had been a good friend of mine for a long time, was suffering very badly, and I had no idea. Neither did most of us around her. And it led up to eventually on the 31st of October 2003 to her suicide. And at the time, I was the last person to have a meaningful conversation for her before she ended her own life. And that thing there, that moment of not knowing, not understanding, led to, as it does with everybody, guilt, shame, regret. And I blamed myself that I should have done something, that I could have done something, and all the rest of it. And unfortunately, like most men, I didn't ask for help. I thought asking for help was weak, and I bottled it all up inside and tried to deal with it myself, and I dealt with it very badly. Big side effect of that was my bulimia, which I'd had previously, flared back up really, really badly again. And I just couldn't deal with the fact that my best friend was gone, and I did not understand in any way, shape or form how it got to that stage without her asking me for help, and why hadn't I seen anything and all the rest of it. And I remember it vividly because she was so happy on the day she ended everything. And that's what really stuck in my head for years and years. I couldn't understand how somebody that was in my limited knowledge of suicide, you're supposed to be unhappy. You're not supposed to be happy when you end your life. Or at least these were all the things I used to think back then before I got educated and understood a bit better about it. But that led me into some really bad behaviours, some real bad risk taking. My bulimia scaled out. And unfortunately, I did nothing about it for all the way through to 2017. And I found myself in 2017 out of the army, been out of the army 7 years. Had a very important job working in the health service, but at the time for the fire service. Um, and I found myself lying curled around the toilet after vomiting from purging myself after an eating episode. 11 o'clock during the day, dressed smart, in my suit, and I was covered in vomit and just awful stuff. And I remember looking down that bowl of that toilet thinking to myself, if I don't change, I'm going to die. And what I didn't realize is on that day, it was the anniversary of my friend's death. And I'd been going through this pattern every single year without even realizing what it was connected to because I blocked the date out. It was just Halloween. It had nothing to do with my friend. And that's when I had to go and get help. And I had to go and clean myself up and do the walk of shame out of the office. And then my life turned around that day then. It's a long path, but that's the day everything changed because I accepted the fact that I had to get help.
Do you think, going back to 2003, when you were in the Royal Military Police within the British Army, that if you had spoken up about your problems then, that in your own mind, do you think people would have laughed at you, that people would have seen it as being, would have seen
Weak.
you as being a weak person? Do you
Yeah.
think you made a mistake at the time in not speaking up?
Yeah, it has to be said. The army's a lot better now, so is the whole of society. But definitely back then, mental health illness was seen as weak. That you should be strong enough to deal with it on your own, and it's only the weak only weak that suffer from it. Plus, there was the real thought that if you spoke up and admitted you had help, you would be labelled and your career would suffer and all the rest of it. And that's the stigma that surrounds mental health to this day. Still, that stigma sticks. That people are scared to talk because they're scared of how they'll be judged. They're scared of what they might uncover when they start to do that work. And I know my career suffered as a result of it, but not from speaking up. It was suffered from the result of the fear I had and then the lies that come into it and the behaviours that come into it, all the rest of it. Would I have spoken up knowing what I know now? Yes. Would I have been brave enough to do it back then? No. So it's a difficult path to walk.
And may I ask you, having received treatment for PTSD, bulimia, and depression, what was the original source of the bulimia issue you had?
It goes all the way back to 1989. A very young soldier, 19-year-old police officer, um, quite topical for where we live now on the island of Ireland. There was an IRA bombing and close quarter assassination campaign across Northern Europe in 89, 90, 91. And back then, I was a computer nerd. There weren't that many of us about, and I got seconded to the Special Investigations Branch to go and deal with terrorist events. And with less than half hour's notice, I was dragged out of my bed one day, put in a car, drove across Germany for 3 hours, blue lights and horns flashing to get to a crime scene. I remember seeing this burnt out car, and it belonged to a guy called Eric Smith, I think was his name, Cottle Smith, and putting on the vehicle booby trap under his car, and it killed him. And I'd gone from sleeping in bed to half hour later staring at this poor chap that had died in a bomb, and he was still in situ in the thing, and I had no way to deal with that. So alcohol and food was where that developed from. That was my crutch. And again, there's lots of reasons for it. Psychologists would have a field day, but it was basically shame, survivor's guilt, unable to do anything. But that then started a pattern that lasted my entire life of eating, drinking to cover the eating so I could throw up after a day and people wouldn't think about it. As a soldier, it was far more acceptable for me to be considered an alcoholic than it was a bulimic. And it was to me in my own head. I could be an alcoholic, that was okay, but I couldn't be a bulimic. Well, that's what, you know, apologies to every lady on the face of the earth. That's what women did. And my poorly educated brain at the time, eating disorders were something that happened to ladies, not to men. I now know completely different, but back then I didn't.
And was there a drinking culture in the army in those days, may I ask?
Yes, there was totally. Yeah, yeah. Again, I'd be no surprise to anybody who knows anything about the forces. Drinking was what we all did. It was our number one social pastime and hobby, and it allowed us to hide a lot behind the veil of the alcohol. It allowed me to hide my bulimia from everybody, including my wife of 18 years, who had no idea. But again, it did what it wanted to do, and we now know there's a huge drinking culture across the whole of Western Europe after the last the first lockdown. All the studies have shown that people are drinking dramatically more than they ever used to do, at home, on their own, in silence, or isolated from other people. And again, it's one of the classic things that allows you to deal with stress is alcohol, but it allows you in a very, very bad way to deal with it, a very unhealthy way. So there's a lot of it going on. I'm glad to say I hardly drink at all now. I'm sociable when it needs to be. It's no longer a crutch for me.
Good man, and well done to you. Do you think that when you left the army, was it around 2010 you left the army?
Yeah, 2010. Yeah, after
That
22 years.
you have been in a very structured environment for a number of years within the army, and do you think missing that structure also contributed to your depression and bulimia problems? 27.
I wouldn't say directly to them, but what it does is it definitely contributes to your lack of sense, your lack of self worth, your lack of understanding of where you fit in the world. So that then makes you uncomfortable, and when you're uncomfortable, you look for your crutches. So I wouldn't say it's a direct correlation, but again, that being cut loose of not no longer being a part of the military, no longer understanding where where I fitted in the world, what left me very prone to leaning on my crutches a lot. Again, I left the military and I rushed off to go and join the health service. So one big, amorphous government body for another one, thinking I would fit in nicely there, and I never did. I was a square peg in a round hole. As it turns out, I'm a square peg in a round hole because I'm also an autistic male, but I had no idea until I was 48 that I was autistic. So again, I would be what you'd call high functioning in the old money, but both my kids are autistic. I'm autistic. It's just something I've had to get used to. But that explains the square peg in the round hole thing. I never really fitted in because I thought a bit different to everybody else. And that just led to lots of revelations in my later life after the falling apart in 2017 about understanding who I am, what I am, and why I'm the way I am. And that was part of the whole reason the Stevenson Way was born, because that's the fundamental principle of it is know thyself, temetnosci in the Latin, understand yourself, where you come from, who you are, and you will better understand why you made the bad decisions you made, and then you can arm yourself to make better decisions in the future going forward.
May I ask you, what was in your mind while you waited in the reception area to speak to a psychotherapist or to a medical profession about your bulimia and your depression? What thoughts were going through your head in that reception area?
Well, I've been there many times, so I'd been in and out of therapy all the way through since the early 90s, and every single time it was the same thing: guilt, anger, shame. Why am I here again? Why can't I fix this? What is wrong with me? Why can't I just be happy like everybody else? All this negative self-reinforcing stuff that goes on, and always I felt like I'd failed, that somehow I was automatically entitled to good mental health, like without ever having done anything to deserve it. Again, so it just always felt like this failure, and that kid, the shame, the regret, horrible things. Then I didn't like talking about things, so I went through a pattern every time of just saying what I had to say once I'd stabilize enough to get me out of there and back to whatever I wanted to do. So this created a pattern of patching myself up, lurching along for another couple of years, breaking, patching myself up, lurching along for another couple of years, breaking. And I went through that pattern many, many times. But the consistent feature was it was always somebody else's fault. There was always somebody else to blame for my decisions and my failures and my mistakes. I never took ownership. I never took um, honestly stood up for the mistakes I'd made and accepted them. So it was always somebody else's fault, and that was one of the biggest things that I came to learn, was to realize that I was the reason I had so much bad problems. It wasn't because the PTSD did it to me. It was because I chose to behave in certain ways that were bad for me. When I stopped behaving in those ways, lo and behold, the life changed.
And at what point did you stop blaming other people and start taking responsibility for your own actions?
I would have said it would have started 2017. I absolutely hit rock bottom. That was the worst I ever got, and it's been an upward path from there. I would have said somewhere in around 2017, 2018, when I was doing the work, and I was working with a completely different therapist I'd ever worked before. He was a retired Catholic priest, and he tried some really different stuff on me, and that made a huge effort for me. But the reality was, he had me stop blaming everybody else through a mix of psychological tools, and that's when it started. And it started with this whole concept of understanding myself and why I'm the way I am. And then when I could accept the way I was, I stopped blaming everybody else. Then it was, I could start to blame myself, and I had to go from blaming myself to accepting myself to forgiving myself. Process, and it wasn't an easy one, but it worked incredibly well for me. Whereas all those years before, nothing had really worked.
And can you explain for the audience what is the Stevenson Way?
So the Stevenson Way is my bit of branding for those lessons that I'd learned in that period in life. Plus, of course, I've been accumulating lessons for that entire 27 years, where I've been patching myself up. Admittedly, lessons about what not to do as opposed to what to do. So the Stevenson Way is just my method that I've taken to teach other people how to have better mental health, and it's built upon six main principles. The first one I've mentioned to already is know thyself. So that's the Tim Norsky, and that's about who are you, where'd you come from, what motivates you. So we look at your background, your past, your life, your upbringing, all those kind of things. Then we'll move into a few other areas. I won't go into them in great detail, but they're basically life lists. So everything that's going on in your life, the good and the bad. So again, what we tend to focus on the bad. We're pessimists by nature, I think, most of us. So we can reel off everything that's bad that happens in our life, but we're much more difficult at reeling off what's good in our life. So I had to get some balance, so some objectivity into it. Then I had to look at my body. I'm no fitness guru, I'm no nutrition guru or anything like that, but I had to look at the basics. I was doing as a bulimic. My you know, I have to be honest, my diet was absolutely shocking. My alcohol consumption was through the roof. There was some recreational drug use in there and some other bits and pieces that just were not good for you. So again, you had to look at all that. So I had to get my body and my mind back in order again. And that was the next bit, mind magic, and that's about learning about how the mind works, learning about how your brain works, how your stress system works, how your gut biome is connected to your mental health. All of that was about a journey of discovery and learning. And the more I learned, the more I understood. The more, for me, I understood why I behaved the way I did. That then led me into basically, right, what am I going to do? So I called that bit plan with intention. I made a plan for how I was going to get myself to where I wanted to be. And I developed that plan with all the things, exactly like you would do a project management plan, smart targets, all the rest of it. And I applied all of my focus to getting better, which I'd never done before. Previously was I went along to see the psychiatrist. I'd sit there for an hour, I'd tell him how I felt, I'd go away and I'd never think about it again. And that was my pattern for so many years. But then I made this, the Stevenson Way, the fundamental part of my life. And that then, the way it works for me then is when you go through all them processes, you're back to square one and you start again. And it's a continual rolling process of evolution. As you get better and better, you learn more about yourself. You're able to deal with more things. That led me into teaching other people and doing coaching and mentoring and all the rest of the stuff that I now do now as the businesses.
And may I ask a question there,
Yeah, of
Scott?
course.
Uh, are you aware of the triggers that may cause bulimia or depression or PTSD to strike back at you? So do you have to be kind of self-aware every day? And
Yes. Yeah, very much so. So I have multiple triggers that used to affect me. They still affect me, but in much smaller scales. So again, there are some people where triggers are absolute, and even the smell of something can trigger them, and that will start their default response, which could be eating, which could be taking drugs, whatever. Well, those triggers are now still there for me, but they don't have as great an effect because I've done all the different work that's involved around removing the effect of those triggers. There's lots of things that can be done, lots of different therapies, that it's probably not time to go into today, but there's lots of things that can be done to reduce the effect of those triggers. Now, again, for me, I have multiple different triggers for multiple different things because I've experienced multiple traumatic events. So again, it's about understanding them. But the fundamental is if you understand yourself and you understand how the brain responds in certain situations, that gives you the knowledge to be able to deal with that more effectively, to put strategies in place to mitigate it or to reduce it. And I find that's very much, for me, it was all about when I learned about the psychology of the brain, how the brain operates, how the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses are triggered by the parts of your brain that are responsible for keeping you safe. And there's loads of good stuff to read out there about it. But again, that's where I learned this stuff. Being autistic, I just suck information in. I'm very, very gifted or lucky, whatever you want to call it, that I can retain huge amounts of information. So I only usually have to read it once or twice, and I've got it for life, which is a gift from God without a doubt.
what advice would you give to a person who's been made redundant in terms of giving themselves a psychological boost and getting
Okay.
going again?
Again, I would imagine, again, it would feel a bit like I felt when I left the army. I left the army, but you've not left. It's not been done to you. It's not your choice. So it's very much, you can see it as a negative, or you can see it as an opportunity, a change, a time to change. Again, we tend to think and we focus on the negative. KPIs. Yeah, everybody knows them. Every business loves them. They only focus on the negative, the 1% you got wrong, not the 99% you got right. So you'll tend to focus on the fact, or you've been made redundant. Don't focus on the fact of everything you achieved during the career you've had to this point and what you want to do now going forward. Maybe you want to do the same thing you've always been doing. Okay, you've got the skills and the knowledge for it. You know who your competitors are. You know who the people in your field are. Use your knowledge, use your connections, and hit the ground running and move with it. Maybe this is your opportunity to change and do something else. So what are your transferable skills? What are you good at? Where could you look other than what you've been doing? Because what you've been doing isn't who you are. That was I viewed myself as what I was doing was who I was. It's not. You can pretty much be anything. Turn your mind to it, achieve it, feel what you want to do. And some of that's about looking inside. Maybe getting somebody you can have a sit down and have a chat with about what your options are, what your skills are if you can't see them yourself. What makes you tick? What makes you get up in the morning? I would, it's easy to say, but see it as an opportunity. And the one thing I will say, when I walked away from my big expensive job and my salary and my pension and all the rest of it, I was terrified I wouldn't have the money to pay the bills or anything like that. It's now 5 years later, and I've never had to once worry in a month about paying the mortgage. And I live on a fraction of the money that I used to live on. Salary is slavery. It's a phrase that I've heard a few times. But as soon as you stop getting money coming in every month, you learn the value of a pound. And being made nothing like being made redundant will allow you to focus on what's important in your life, really important to you, your family. And again, everything else that we do to keep up appearances and all the rest of it is just window dressing. Again, it really focuses your attention on what you've got to do to change your definition of success.
True, and I think the most important thing for any person who's considering starting a business of their dreams or returning to full-time employment is to make sure the work you're doing is in line with your values as a person. Otherwise, you're just wasting your own time and other people's time. What does the future hold for Scott Stevenson?
Well, for me, it's growing the Stevenson way, but only in a sort of smallish way. I'm not interested in mega success and mega money and controlling the world. What I do is I get up every day, and every single day I have a client I work with that I'm able to help. Whether it's a business, whether it's an individual, whether it's somebody suffering from family problems, emotional problems, doesn't matter what. I help different people in different days, and every single day I help somebody, and that is what gets me up in the morning. Every morning makes me incredibly happy to be alive because every day I do a little bit of good in the world, and that is what my value is. What my mission in life is. I have always wanted to make a difference, and now I do. In the past, I wanted to change the world because I dreamt big because I thought big was success. Now I've just reframed my thing. Success is anything where I can look at it and say, you know what, I'm good with that. And I start the morning, every morning when I shave, I look in the mirror and I'm happy to see the face that smiles back at me. I'm completely content with who I am. I'm no longer worried about, whether I look good, whether I'm too fat, whether I'm this or whether I'm that. I'm just completely comfortable in my own skin. And that is what I want to do, is to teach other people to have that kind of fulfillment and happiness I've got. And again, would I like to throw in a few foreign holidays a year? Absolutely, if COVID ever goes away. But it's about reframing what success is for yourself, and that's what I want to do: share that joy, share that ability to just be comfortable in your own skin with other people, whether it's businesses, whether it's individuals, and so on. One of the things I enjoy most is going to workplaces and asking them what stresses them out, what makes people stressed, and everybody starts telling me it's all about their work and they hate their work and all the rest of it. And an hour later, they're all telling you it's got nothing to do with work. It's got everything to do with their home life, because we tend to blame our jobs and our environment for everything. But the biggest source of stress in the world is our heart and our head. We do it to ourselves, unfortunately. And it's about learning how not to do it to yourself.
Yeah, true. And what I'd say to people who've been made redundant, particularly from, say, large or multinational organizations who are considering going into the self-employment route, is that you have to be able to think on your own 2 feet. You have to be able to accept your strengths and your weaknesses, and not to be afraid to take an opportunity to step out of your comfort zone and to take on a constructive challenge and to develop a new skill. And the most effective way to do that is to ask for help.
Totally, totally. Yeah. And one of the biggest things when I left the health service, I had 60 staff. So if I didn't know how to do something, out of the 60 people that worked for me, I could guarantee I could find somebody that knew what they were doing. So I never had to ask for help as such. I just went and said, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? And the hierarchy was this comfortable thing that allowed me to delegate everything out. When I went onto my own, I did the classic mistake everybody does, which is try to do everything yourself. And it's just madness. If you go on the entrepreneurial, self-employed, founding your own business, the best advice you can ever get is get people to help you with everything that you need. Ask for help everywhere you can, and just soak up the knowledge and the information from as many different sources as you can. It may not always be right for you, but it's good to know. It's good to know. But yeah, I struggled so bad because I decided to leave the business, leave my work on the Monday, resigned on the Wednesday, and started the business on a Friday. So you can imagine how much planning went into it. So then I had to learn it all from scratch. But if you've been given that opportunity and you're going to go that way, study, learn, ask for help all the time, join entrepreneurial groups, join Facebook groups, whatever you can to get the information. Be critical about it because it's not always going to be good information or good advice. But again, absolutely ask for help. And one of the biggest thing is your previous job does not define who you are. You are not the vice president of whatever that used to be in City when they made you redundant. You're Scott. You're John. Again, first and foremost, that's who you are. Everything else was just a uniform that you used to wear. You can take that uniform off and put another one on dead easily if you can get the right mindset for it.
Do you have a gift for the audience today, Scott?
Certainly, John. Yeah. Again, I offer free consultations for everybody who wants to consider working with me, and that's as it is. If you're local to Belfast, I do them in person, but otherwise it's via Zoom. Book in. We have a 30-45 minute discussion about whether it's interested in me working with your company or me working with you individually. Either or, we have a good chat and see what things. Because one of the things is I'm not for everybody. What I know is for everybody, but my personality, my operation, the way I work is not for everybody. And therefore, there's no point engaging in a business transaction if we're just not going to get on a fundamental level. And I feel that the rapport between somebody that's coaching and mentoring you, and especially where mental health is concerned and the kind of the things we're going to be talking about, if you can't trust the person and get on with the person, you're really going to be, on hiding to nothing. So that's where it comes about for me. Find that rapport. Find out if you can be honest and open with the other person and work with them, and then if you can, then build from there. And I find when it comes to workplaces as well, that owners, business owners, senior managers, they don't want to let some randomer loose on their staff in case they cause mayhem and havoc beforehand. So I find that the more I get to know the people before we agree on doing business together, the more chance, the more trust there is, and the more willing they are to let me deal with their staff and address some of the problems that might be going on in the workplace or in their home lives.